The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Our guest today, Wendi Powers, was on last week, and if you haven't had a chance, I would urge you to go back to our past shows button and listen to our conversation about lots of things, including the City of Light. Wendi was born in Florida in the 1970s at a time when autism spectrum disorders were not fully understood. And as a result, Wendi was bullied and sometimes terrorized and suffered from depression and PTSD. But through it all, she reports the source, God, provided her with spiritual and emotional support that would heal those wounds and allow her to share her experiences with others. And she has got, along with those handicaps, she got some amazing gifts as well, gifts of out-of-body experience and the like. So, Wendi, welcome back to NDE Radio.
Hello, Lee. Good to be back.
Okay. Well, listen, we were just finishing up talking about your return from the City of Light, the fact that your family had all experienced this when they were children at the same time. And it crossed my mind that possibly, as someone who believes in reincarnation, perhaps that city was a source for your family. Originally, maybe you reincarnated on Earth after living in the City of Light.
It's quite possible. I know I wasn't there because I remember all of my past lives, but it's possible that they were.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about one of your interesting past lives.
Well, just in a nutshell, my first past life, I was actually a planet, more like an ice planet, and it sounds totally bizarre, but I just remember I experienced a long time that didn't have a definition of time, and then seeing life come into this onto this skin of ice and growing and doing things on their own and just being fascinated, just watching it. So that gives me a connection with Earth Mother here, and knowing that she is a being that has a full consciousness and full awareness and what we feel like to her. And then somehow it blew up, or was hit or something. But as a conscious being, I ended up on Earth. And my first life, I was a farmer who went through an experience of the house catching on fire and losing a son who was up in the upstairs attic type of situation, and my wife blaming me for his death, and living by myself in a small kind of hut, just farming. And when I died of seeing these angels sitting there at the side of the bed and praying for the first time and saying, God, if you're real, if you can hear me, forgive me for letting my son die. And this angel saying there's nothing to forgive and you're loved. So there was that, and then there's just a couple other, nothing fancy, just a couple other lives, a singer who was murdered, and I was, in the 20s, and I remember. Then after that, I was a African American woman who worked in a doctor's office / hospital and experienced the racism and I remember being a little child and trying to bleach my skin, and the way that felt, and being severely beaten by my parents for doing that and being ashamed of who I was. And I remember having a really hard time in that life because of being Black, and I was married to a man who was very abusive. I had two children, and they were getting ready to be taken away from me, and I ended up committing suicide. And I remember clear as day the apartment that I lived in, and sitting there in that chair with the gun, and having read the Bible, going to church, knowing or being taught that if you committed suicide, you were going to go to hell. But I thought, if I do this, at least my children will stand a chance. And I just couldn't go through any more of the abuse and putting my kids through that. I was like, let the state take them away and be done with it. So I remember the second that I did that once again, that angel was there. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to go to hell. And the angel said, no, that's not how this works. And you're loved beyond all measure. And just being kind of shocked by it, going, wow, really? I'm loved? And the source going, or the angel's like, yeah, you're not going to go to hell. And so I remember being relieved. And then the next life, I was a soldier. I was born a white male into an affluent family. I remember tennis courts. I remember the Roadster. And I still to this day love a Roadster. I remember being a kid and my father having one and just loving that. He was a politician of some sort, and I had an older brother. And it was during Vietnam had started up, and he was drafted. My father, being whatever statesman he was, got my older brother out of the draft, and it made me mad. I realized that it wasn't fair that some families had to pay the price and other families got off because they had power. So I signed up, and I remember the day I left, of going in the house and no one was in there, and my mother had left a note on the table saying, your food's in the fridge and goodbye. They just really didn't care that I was leaving. And I remember how that felt. And when I was, so I ended up in Vietnam, and I was a tunnel rat. And those are the people who went into the tunnels that the Vietnamese made and cleared them out. And I was doing that. And then as I gave an all clear and was coming up out of the hole, and one of my own guys fragged me. So next thing I know, I was back with the guardians again, or angels. And so.
Oh, tell us what is it like between lives? What do you remember?
Yeah, it's actually the best way to describe it is a way that in this life I had one of my dreams that wasn't a dream, and I was standing in this corridor, like a hotel corridor, and every room was a separate life. And one of my spirit guides who was with me, he said, when you go into the room, you forget everything that's happened in any of the other rooms, and you forget everything in the corridor. But when you are done with that room and focusing on that room, and you come out into the corridor, you remember all of them. So then you can decide what's the next room you're going to go into.
Based on what you'd experienced in your past lives. Interesting.
Yeah, that's how it was shown.
How many past lives do you think you've lived?
Just that the planet, the farmer, the singer, the African-American lady, and the soldier in this one. So this is number 6 for me.
Sometimes people talk about, without having any memory of it, I've probably had thousands of past lives. But I think the people that do remember that it's not that great a number.
Huh. Yeah, I know my first one was a really long one, being an ice an ice planet. So I don't know if I was anything before then who knows, but.
Well, they say, you can be reincarnated. Everything has consciousness, right? So you could be reincarnated as an animal, or as a plant, or as a rock, or as a planet. No reason why that shouldn't be. Okay, so let's see. You had said that you met your guardian angel. Tell us about that.
Yes, it was so wonderful. This was at a time right after I'd actually went through a brief marriage when I was 18 with a very abusive ex-husband and a psychopath, and then went to college, and the Lord let me go through that program. And I had just graduated. Of course, it took me 10 years to get a 4-year degree, which is kind of fun, but I got it. So I was very thrilled about that. And I had gotten to the point where I had broken off any toxic relationships because I finally had my degree and I was finally able to be free of a lot of poisonous relationships and bondage in my life. And I had gotten back to the point where I didn't give a name to God because I was raised fundamental, independent, Bible believing, King James Version, Baptist only church, one of those. And I decided that if God wanted me to know who it was, then it would show me itself. And it did. And so I was at this place that God actually spoke to me in an audible voice the morning I was supposed to go in the temp job there. And I wasn't going to show up, and God spoke in an audible voice and said, if you don't go in today, you will mess up everything I have planned for you for the rest of your life. So, well, I had asked God, I said, I'm spiritually deaf. And so if you're going to talk to me, please just say it. None of this whispering stuff, just yell it at me. So God said, okay, you asked for it. And yeah, so I ended up there, and that's where I met my life partner. And I wasn't sure what to do with my degree and my newfound freedom and everything. And I thought, I could go to a reservation and teach because my degree was in teaching. And I wanted to do whatever God wanted me to do, but I just didn't know what that was. Like a lot of young people, the 30s still being young at the time. But anyway, I was working that temp job in human resources. It was a big building with a center security desk, 2 wings, and the HR department was way down at the end of one of the wings. They had to go through the doors to get into it, and it was a big room with a lot of little, offices all around it. And I was sitting there doing some paperwork stuff, and everyone's coming and going and stuff. And then all of a sudden, like no one else was kind of in the room, but this man came in, and he had dark skin. He was a black man. He was just the most beautiful human being I have ever seen in my entire life. Just his countenance and he was stunning, just absolutely beautiful. And he said hello, and I said hi. I said, can I help you with something? He said, I'm here for an appointment. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, do you want to sit down and wait? It was at the table. So I sat back down, and he sat down with me. And suddenly I was just so at ease, and we started talking. And it seemed like we must have talked for 20 minutes. And I had asked him, I said, I love your accent, because it sort of sounded Jamaican, or it was just very unique, but crisp and articulate. It matched how beautiful he was as a person. And I said, I love that accent. Where are you from? He just laughed and he said, oh, all over. I said, oh, okay. So we finished talking, and I'd asked him. I said, well, I just he had asked me what I was going to do for the rest, with my life. I said, I don't know. I want to do whatever God wants me to do. That's the only thing. Whatever God wants me to do, I'll do it. And he smiled and he said, God wants you to do whatever will make you happy. And I was just like, really? He said, yeah. I was like, that's it? He said, yeah. Wow. Okay. And so I was kind of dumbfounded, and he stood up and he shook my hand and said, it was so nice to finally meet you. I was like, huh? And then he turned around, he walked out the door, and I was taken back. I'm going, well, what? And I thought, I finally came to my senses. And during this time, no one had come in or out of HR. And I was like, I forgot to ask him who he was here to have an appointment with, so I could go rush back there and tell him they had someone waiting for him. And it couldn't have been but just maybe 2 or 3 seconds after he walked out the door. And I opened the door to chase after him, and there was no one in the hallway. And I'm like, wait a second. So I thought, well, the man was tall, and I'm very short at 5 foot. So I thought, well, maybe with his gazelle legs, he was off to the men's bathroom. So I rushed up to the bathroom area, and a friend of mine was coming out of the guy's bathroom. I said, was there anyone else in there? And he said, no one else is in there. I'm like, okay. And so I went to the security desk, and I asked my friend there, I said, I was describing this guy. She said, oh, honey, if a man would have come in here looking like that, I'd have noticed. So he had there was no trace of him, and no one else had seen him. So I went back into HR, and I went into the conference room that has a really good view of the flat area between that building and the Nashville International Airport. Was looking up into the sky, and way high was a beautiful clear day, clear blue, not a cloud in sight. And I was watching this little dot go through, and I was thinking, man, that plane is just at a really high altitude. It's not going to land at Nashville because it's so high. I was looking at it, and then I was thinking about the man I just met. I was like, that was my guardian angel. And I just knew it. I thought, oh, man, I forgot to tell him thank you. As soon as I had that thought, that dot of light stopped, dead on a dime, stopped, and then did a check mark, just zoom right up into the atmosphere and was gone. So I guess he heard me. I guess that was a you're welcome.
Very neat. Were there any other out-of-body experiences that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, when I was practicing my skills one time, I actually had an out-of-body experience the morning I predicted an earthquake of California that happened in June. And I had actually predicted this earthquake back in January of that year. And I was at college and just floored, and Florida had an awareness come to me, and it said there's going to be an earthquake in California the last 2 weeks of June or the first week of July. And this was back in January, and I was like, wow, it just floored me. I said, okay. So when I got home, I posted it to the Prodigy board, shows you dating myself there. And I, of course, was ridiculed. All these people, no one has the ability to predict earthquakes, yada, yada. And I had one lady who wrote me email, and she said, do you have any, more information on that? Can you tell me anything? Because I live in California. And I prayed about it and stuff. And so I gave her a date that felt close to it, because she said she only had a week off of vacation, and something was telling her to get out of the house, and that I was not making it up. So I told her that. And then that was all I heard from her. So the morning I had that out-of-body experience, I was actually floated from my body and remember seeing this Earth suit, and I fell in love with it on that morning because it was just this human body lying there, but it wasn't me. And I was like, oh, like a little animal, just like, oh, I got to take care of that little being. And then I floated through the ceiling, and there was a bunch of shoes in the upstairs person's closet, which I was like, man, this lady has some shoes. I mean, like, serious. Which my landlady ended up confirming about a year after that when they ran cable through the apartment complex. And she's like, you would not believe how many shoes is in her closet. I'm like, I've kind of been through the closet, so I've seen it. But after that, later that morning when I woke up, I got on Prodigy and I saw where there actually had been an earthquake that night or that morning. And I was like, well, that's what I predicted. And then about 3 days later, this lady writes me back and she said, you saved my life. I was like, how's that? She said that earthquake, she had a giant mirror above her bed. She says one that was several hundred pounds, but it was anchored into the wall with earthquake anchors. And somehow one of those anchors had failed. And that mirror had crashed right down on her bed. She said, I'd have been in the bed, I would have been asleep and probably killed. But something told me that I needed to listen to what you were saying. So I was out of town.
Nice. It's nice when you can tie in saving somebody's life to an OBE or to a prophecy. Have you had any other prophecies like that?
Yeah, several. Just a lot of random things. I know earthquakes. I was able to predict the plane crash when my fiance, when I was 24 and he was 26, I told him in May of that year that his plane was going to crash. It was a single engine, that he was going to die in the crash. And I begged him to get a twin engine. And he didn't want to do it because he was a self-made millionaire, but he was just very stingy with his own money. He wouldn't hesitate giving a $20 tip to someone at Shoney's after he got his volunteer sheriff deputy discount. But he was an awesome man, awesome guy. And my mother taught me, you don't marry for money, you marry for love. And I said, well, I'll marry you when I'm out of college because then I'll feel right, and it won't be just because you're a millionaire. So, but I told him I still had several years to go before I got out of college. And I said, Bob, I said, if you come back to me and don't die in this plane crash, I'll marry you the next time I see you. Because he lived in a different part of Tennessee. And he, sure enough, his private plane crashed and he passed away, and I found out about it. So I was totally distressed about that. But then Spirit let him come to me in a dream that wasn't a dream. When he sat on the couch with me and he was goofing around and he said, oh, look, I'm electric now. If I'd have known how good this felt, I'd have died sooner. And that was just his type of humor. And I said, well, did it hurt? I just wanted to know if it hurt. And I hate the idea of anyone suffering or having pain. And he said, well, I was up in the plane and I felt the engine stall. And I looked down, and what it was is he was a volunteer sheriff deputy, and he had his best friend with him. And they were off duty, and there was an escaped prisoner. So they had gotten up in the plane to see if they could see him, and it was at night, and he ran into a microburst. He said, the weather was clear, but he ran into a microburst. He said, I felt the engine stall, and I felt the plane go into a nosedive. Next thing I know, I was still in the air. And I was looking down at the plane, and he said, oh, blank, now I have to buy a new plane. He said, oh, wait a second, I'm dead. If I'm still up in the air, I'm dead. I won't be buying a new plane.
So he visited you to tell you that he'd had an out-of-body experience just before he died.
Yeah. Well, sharing with me his death experience and passing over, and that he was okay.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have any prophecies to share of some future event with us, do you?
No, it's strange. I knew with the 9/11 stuff, I knew the second tower was going to go down, and I was working in a building that it was a state building at the time. And I remember telling people, I said, "Can you tell people?" As soon as we saw the first one go down, I knew the whole event that was going to erupt. I even saved the screenshot as Day of War, and knew what was going to happen for the whole thing. And they were like, "Oh no, the second building's fine." And I'm like, "It's both of them will be gone by the end of the day." But there was a friend that I predicted the stock market crash, and I told her it was specifically for her though, and I said, "Take your money out of the stocks and put it in bonds." And she listened to me, and her daughter, who I happened to go to college with years before, came up to me at a movie theater and rushed up to me in the parking lot. And she said, Wendy, so I wanted you to know that you saved my mother's retirement by telling her that. So it's like the predictions aren't for just like the masses. It's I'll feel things and get extremely distressed if there's an earthquake that's going to happen, but it's not like just generic predictions. I think the biggest prediction now is that we are in the final stages, and there is hope that if people just pull together, love each other, remember that when God was asked his name, her name, its name, God said, "I am." And those two words in English tell exactly the entire answer. And then to clarify, God said, "I am love." So, and it said, everyone that loves is born of God and knows God. If you don't love, you're not born of God. So it comes down, it's just very cut and dry. If you love, Jesus said, "This one commandment I give you, and that's to love one another." And if you love and obey that commandment, everything else will follow, because you're not going to steal from someone you love. You're not going to want to kill them. You don't covet what they have. You rejoice because they have something. And it's that whole thing. And that's what, in this end time of surrendering to the ego of this is mine, no, you can't have it, and saying, if you need it, you can have it. It's yours. And that just walking in love, that's going to be the answer to every question.
Well, if we can overcome all the corporate greed in the world and in time, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yep.
I do you see any you see a happy end at the very end of things, because in the end it's all part of Source anyway. But do you see difficult times in between now and then?
Yeah. It's a childbirth. It's growing pains. It's just like anyone here who has cancer. We experience the beingness of Source at a micro level, a small level. So if you think about someone who's sick and in the hospital and they have cancer, they're going to hurt, and they're going to have to go through radiation or chemo, or just they'll have to do different things, and the body has to pull together for them to survive and make it. And Source is going to make it and already has made it, but it's a matter of just that healing, and us all. If we're the cell of a hand, we do the work of a hand. We don't say, "Hey, I just want to be an ear right now." That's cancer. The law of God's written in the heart of man. We all know what the answer is. We all know what we're supposed to do, and that's walk in love and now by now. And that's things are going to be hard, because that ego part, that's the cancer ego, not the tool of ego, but the actual thinking that someone is separate and not part of Source, thinking Source is on the outside of them, or that if they are, because they are part of Source, that they're the whole Source. That type of ego is just like any other cancerous cell in the body. It's trying to hijack the whole system. So cancer cells tend to fight really hard trying to keep their ego and their mission going, even though the cancer cells don't realize that once the body is gone, they die as well.
Right.
So yeah,
That's
things
true.
are going to be hard, but there's hope.
Well, on that hopeful note, I want to thank you, Wendi, for being a guest on 2 shows.
Thank you, Lee.
If folks didn't hear the first part, last week's show, go into our Talk Zone Past Shows button and listen to Wendi's part 1. Okay, Wendi, thanks so much. And when you get your book done, you let us know and we'll have you on again.
Will do.
All right. For more about the work of IANDS, listeners, go to iands.org. And tune in again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.